This month's book, A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. And this is a book that's really designed to bring a shift in consciousness that is not just, essential in terms of your own happiness, your own experience of you, but also, as he talks about a lot in this book, to ending conflict and suffering throughout the world. And the reason I chose this book for this month is that it's a book that I personally love. It's one of my go-tos, and it's a book that goes hand in hand with what I teach in Transformation Mastery, as you're about to see. Okay, and the first thing I really thought we could dive into here is the ego and the mechanics of the ego. Okay, and he talks about this in depth, just how it works, and what he says is that the root of all dysfunction is the identification with the ego. And this is something that I could not agree more with. It really comes down to that split. Okay, as you know, due to the way that we're conditioned, we split ourselves in half. There's the acceptable you and the unacceptable you. You grow up, it's like, hey, don't do this, don't be that. You're like, okay. So you make that split, and this is what really entrenches us in that paradigm that's built on scarcity. It all comes down to that split. This is the root of all dysfunction, and this is the ego. Okay, the ego, if you will, is when you make that split, instead of just being, let's just say, abundance, you say, no, I am this. Instead of being all of you, instead of being complete, you're like, no, I am only the acceptable half of me. That is me. It's the front you put on, in a way. So you make that split. There's the unacceptable you, the acceptable you. Your ego is the acceptable you. Okay? Now, there is a lot of, ideas when it comes to the ego that label it as bad, that label it as something you want to get rid of. And understanding it from this perspective, it's not that it's bad, and it's not something you want to disown. It's something you want to dissolve. And this is huge. Okay? The ego is not something you want to get rid of, for the ego is part of you. The ego is that acceptable side of you. There's that split. If you're like, no, let me get rid of the ego, you're just flipping it around where you're now labeling the ego as unacceptable. And it doesn't get to the cause. It just makes things worse. You just disown even more. Okay, so the ego is part of you, but it's not all that is you. And you need to let go of your attachment to being this part of you and your resistance to being that other part of you and just be. Okay? And this is huge in terms of understanding the ego. Do not disown the ego. Let go of your attachment and resistance to the rest. Okay? What he says here is that the ego isn't wrong, it's just unconscious. And this is really what begins that compulsive chase for more. That compulsive chase of identifying with more, trying to enhance our egos as a way of compensating for the unacceptable side of us. Okay, you make that split, you're now in the paradigm of scarcity, and from there, to compensate, you try to enhance your ego. And what he says here is that the unconscious drive behind the ego is to strengthen the image of who I think I am. Okay, and the way you identify with something is you make it part of you. It's the whole me, my, mine. And this is how you become attached to not just different aspects of you, but different things and objects in the external world. You buy a computer, it's now my computer. And instead of just being an object, it's now part of your ego. It's a way of compensating for the stuff you disowned, the unacceptable side of you. You buy a book, it's now my book. You read the book, you accumulate the knowledge, let's just say it's now my knowledge. You buy a cell phone, it's now my cell phone. Okay, you get a girlfriend, you get a boyfriend, it's now my girlfriend, boyfriend. It's now my partner, it's now my friends. It's now my house. Okay, and it's just this endless chase of trying to accumulate more. The ego tends to equate having with being. Okay, the ego believes that the more I have, the more I enhance myself through having, the more I am. Okay, through having or doing as a way of having. Okay, you believe that the more you do, eventually you will accumulate enough doings. Okay, you will have doings, if that makes sense, instead of simply being. And an interesting thing here he says too, by the way, in terms of it's not the thing but the place it's coming from, is that we need to honor the world of things, not despise it. And we can't really honor things if we use them as a means of self-enhancement. Okay, trying to find ourselves in them. So this does not mean, oh man, I just realized I identified with my computer, I must get rid of my computer. No. Okay, it doesn't take away from the thing, it's the place it's coming from. And if you really want to enjoy the computer, experience the computer, you can't become attached to it. You can't identify with it. And here's another great quote. There are people who have renounced all possessions, but have a bigger ego than some millionaires. Okay, however, for them, instead of being identified with, say, money or the image of being a millionaire, they're identified with the mental image of someone who has transcended all interest in material possessions, and by doing so is therefore superior and is more spiritual than others. Okay, so it's really not the thing, it's the place it's coming from. The content of the ego may change, but the mind structure that keeps it alive does not. And this is huge. Okay, the content of the ego varies from person to person. It really depends on you, your upbringing, your perspective at the time, what you have, what you identify with, unique to you, but the structure is the same for every single person. Okay, egos live on identification and separation. Don't forget that. Identification plus separation. The I, what you identify with, cannot survive without the other. It's that split. It all comes down to that split. And this is also one of the reasons why making yourself right and others wrong is one of the principal egoic patterns. Okay, because if you're right, then someone else has to be wrong. You can't be right without having someone who is wrong. Identification, separation. Okay, and being right here places you really in a position of superiority because you're the one who's right, and it enhances your ego. Okay, your ego loves to make wrong in order to be right. Complaining, holding grudges, blaming, all of those things enhance your ego. You may think you don't want to complain. You may think you don't want to hold grudges. However, by doing so, you're right, the other person's wrong, and your ego feels stronger. Okay, and it's not just a person that can be made wrong, but a situation. You're upset about something. You enhance your ego through that. I'm right, other people are wrong. This situation is wrong. Huge. Okay, and the ego also likes to take on different roles as well to enhance itself. A very common one is the victim. We think we don't want to be victims. However, if you're a victim, you get sympathy. First of all, you get pity. People get interested in you and your story and your problems, and it enhances your ego. Okay, and deep down inside, your ego does not even want its problems to end because it's part of its identity. I see it with clients that I coach. They tell me like, hey, Julian, I get what you're saying, but, it's different with me because of XYZ. During my childhood, XYZ happened. When I was a kid, this happened, this horrible thing that happened to me, and this is why it's a little different for me, so on and so forth. And what I tell them is, hey, I get it. And what I'm about to tell you here does not take away from that story. It doesn't mean that that story is good or bad or that you're overblowing it. It could be a horrible story, a horrible thing that should never have happened to you. Never. However, if you keep identifying with it, if you keep hanging on to it, you'll never find a way out of it. You'll never grow beyond it. You'll never let go of it. It'll confine you. Okay, and this is why you really need that willingness to let go. You need to commit to abundance. You need to value that above, feeling important or having your ego enhanced. Okay, and another great quote here. Whenever you feel superior or inferior to anyone, that's the ego in you. Okay, and there are general roles like the victim, but also moment-to-moment roles. Okay, for example, depending on who you talk to or who you interact with, there may be subtle changes in your demeanor. changes in your speech, your attitude, your behavior, based on the role that you're playing with that person or the role that they're playing. Okay, if you take someone who, very common when it comes to success with women, if you think you're down here and the person you're interacting with, like say the girl is up here, you're going to act in a very different way than if you see yourselves as equal. Okay, if you're talking to an employee or your boss, you're going to act very differently, different roles you put on. If you're in a restaurant and there's a waiter, this one was, what was weird for me, this is one where as a kid I was always, for some reason, like extremely stifled when talking to waiters. And even later on when I started working on my personality in different situations, I'd be very confident, but you place me talking to a waiter and the same fucking role would kick in and the same demeanor as me as a kid. Like I'd be confident like this, like, hey, how's it going? Da da da. Waiter, I'm like, excuse me, could I please have this? Thank you. They'll just kick it. I'm like, what the fuck was that? Your ego. Okay. And what he says is that instead of human beings interacting with each other, conceptual mental images or different fronts that we put on are interacting with each other instead. Okay. And a question to ask yourself here is, what role are you playing? And just look at the general picture. What is the role that you play the most? And a great way to bring some awareness to this is ask yourself, what movie character do you relate to the most? If you watch a movie, if you watch a TV show, whatever it is, who are you in that movie, in that TV show? Who do you connect with? Who do you see yourself as? And it's not always the hero. We think, the main character, of course. No, don't give me the answer you think would impress me or impress someone. Give yourself the real answer. Who do you see yourself? Is it the hero? Is it the number two? Is it the bad guy? Is it the guy who loses the girl? Is it the guy who's not that important? Who is it? Okay, for me, as I've mentioned many a times, I was always the self-destructive artist. And that was a general role that became me, and it defined me. It defined me and it confined me. And this is why I had a lot of trouble, for example, getting in shape, because if I got in shape, I was no longer the destructive artist. What determines your ceiling, let's just say, for success, whether it's financial, in relationships, when it comes to health, whatever it is. Okay, so what character are you? And maybe list out the pros and cons. What's the ceiling of success for that character? And how might that character have influenced you in terms of where you're at in your life? Look back at your life. Look at your ceiling for success. Look at different patterns. And most likely you'll see a link between that character and that. Okay, and that is something you have to let go of. And another way here you can also sense you're playing a role is when there is a secondary agenda. Okay, usually linked to protection or strengthening of the ego. And if you take action, for example, to protect the ego, to enhance it, to conform to an identity, there's an outcome, there's an agenda versus just taking action for its own sake. Every time there's an agenda, it's linked to a certain role or linked to getting approval for you having a certain front. Okay, now when you hear this, you might ask yourself, okay, well, how do I realize I'm playing a role. How can I be myself without a role? And he talks about this too. And what he says is that this is the wrong question to ask yourself, because it implies that you must do something to be yourself. How can I be myself? What can I do to be myself? You can't do anything to be yourself. You already are yourself. And this is another trap we tend to fall into, where the mind will tell you, okay, well, let's see, how can I be myself now? Let's come up with different ways of being myself, strategies to be myself. And that's just another role, the role of trying to be yourself. Okay. And, remember this, give up on defining yourself, and you won't die and you will come to life. And this was something someone actually realized recently, was this past weekend at Transformation Mastery Live. He realized, like, oh my God, everything I've been doing my entire life has been chasing different goals, and it's all been done in reaction. And after this event, it's like the slate's been wiped clean, but now what? And he was like kind of freaking out because he's like, well, I don't know anymore. And what I tell him, fucking awesome. And it's always scary shit, like, I don't know anymore. But guess what? You're not going to die. You will come to life. Remember that. You will not die. You will come to life. And if you can define who you are in words, that's not really who you are. If you can put yourself into words, that's a very small self. Okay. The next thing he really goes in depth on is the pain body. And what he says is that almost everyone carries in his or her energy field an accumulation of old emotional pain, which I call the pain body. Any negative emotion that is not fully faced or seen for what it is in the moment it arises does not completely dissolve. Okay, it leaves behind a remnant of pain. This is when you suppress or repress it. And so beautiful when he writes this. Children, in particular, find strong negative emotions too overwhelming to cope with and tend to try to not feel them. And remember, when something's too overwhelming, it becomes traumatic. And in the absence of a fully conscious adult who guides them, for example, with love and compassionate understanding into facing the emotion directly, choosing not to feel is indeed the only option for the child at the time. And that's pretty much all of us. You know, it's like it's too much, we just don't feel. We suppress it, we repress it. And because we do so, the remnants of pain left behind by every strong negative emotion that is not fully faced, accepted, and then let go of, join together and form an energy field that lives in the very cells of your body. And it has a dormant stage and an active stage. And when it's active, that's when it gets triggered. Okay, and it can be triggered by anything, any event, at any time, even little things, like a fucking smell. Okay, or something somebody says, something somebody does, even a thought. You think a certain thought, bang, you're triggered. Okay, and when you're triggered, it takes over. It's something that lives through you, pretending to be you, and you just feel it, like you are actually possessed. When you have a pain body attack, when you're triggered, you are possessed. If you felt that, for example, doing the social anxiety exercises, like life or death, and like freak out, that's not really you clinging for life and death, because you consciously know in that situation you're not going to die. That is something that has taken over. The pain body's unhappiness is always clearly out of proportion with the apparent cause. It's an overreaction. Every time you overreact to something in a way that's disproportionate to reality, it's linked to something that's been suppressed or repressed. It's linked to your pain body. Okay, and a couple other interesting things he says here is that excessive consumption of alcohol will often activate the pain body as well. And this is why you might have experienced this, or I'm sure you know people who have experienced this, where when they drink, they become extremely mean, or extremely just evil. Now, not drinking, okay, that's a good stepping stone there if you know you're going to become evil. However, use that as, again, a signal that there's something you have to dive into, because it doesn't get to the cause. If whenever you drink, your pain body comes out, you're like, oh, I'm just not going to drink, the pain body's still there. Okay, instead, it'd be like, oh shit, there's something I have to dive into and let go of. And the other interesting thing is that in intimate relationships, pain bodies are often clever enough to lie low until you start living together, or preferably have a signed contract committing yourself to be with this person for the rest of your life. Okay, you don't just marry your wife or husband, you also marry her or his pain body, and your spouse marries yours. And I'm sure you've experienced that. You meet someone, hit it off, it goes well. You're like, this is the honeymoon phase. This is the person I've always dreamt of meeting. Amazing. And then a few months pass, and whenever it starts becoming comfortable, you start coming comfortable with each other, like we're now a thing. Whenever it's kind of established we're a thing, whether it's some time passing or just in the vibe, or you move in together, or you officially start dating, or you get married, whatever it is, suddenly there's a little bit of a shift in that person. And it's usually when you move in together. And this is why there's so many stories about people moving in together and then shit hitting the fan just out of the blue. It's been so amazing until we moved in together. It's been so amazing until we got married. That's why. As soon as you know there's some investment on the other side, it allows you to not be so careful about keeping your pain body in check. Now it's like, ha ha ha, look at who you're with. And then you let it out, and the same for the other person. And as a little side note, this is my recommendation. Don't, for example, if you're thinking about, say, marriage or long-term commitment, just jump into it. Spend a lot of time with that person, and not just doing exciting things. Spend a lot of time where you're just kind of stuck with each other. So you can have those pain bodies come out. And don't just bounce out at the sign of a pain body. No matter who you're with, there's going to be pain body attacks. And then it's a chance to see if you're both committed to working through that together. My friend Owen used to say this. He's like, people just get married to make the relationship better. But in reality, marriage should come at the end. It's like you get married and now you're together, you're stuck together. Instead, it's like be stuck together. Like ideally, there would be this test where you both, commit to living in this, I don't know, like this apartment box. Like you commit to living in this fucking box where it's just the two of you with nothing for 2 years. And if you survive that and at the end you still want to get married, get fucking married. But just an interesting thing to keep in mind. Okay. And in terms of breaking free, there's a big focus here on awareness. Okay. Which I agree with. This is the, first agent for change, for transformation. As soon as you become aware of the ego or aware of the pain body, for example, whenever you're triggered, it starts dissolving. Okay. You kind of sever that identification. It's not fully gone, but you stop fueling it, let's just say. Okay. Ego implies unawareness. Awareness and ego cannot coexist. When it is recognized, it can no longer pretend to be you and live and renew itself through you. Okay. And he then talks about breaking free from this through presence and stillness. Okay. Whenever you're fully present to the moment, you're here right now, fully, there is no ego. And this means you're here and you're not, being influenced by the past, by the pain body, or you're not trying to feed the ego by labeling things or identifying with different things in one way or another. When you're just really here, right now, right here, that's when you're free from the ego. Okay, and that's the doorway to being free from the ego. Now, I agree, okay, with the fact that when you let go of all that and you realize this state of what I call abundance, what he calls a state of being or oneness, you are fully present. Okay, you're present to the right here, right now. However, and this is, from my experience, presence comes after the fact. You cannot chase presence directly. It's not, I'm present to let go. It's, I let go and I'm present as a byproduct of letting go. It's another comparison to success with women. This is what I realized there. I would teach guys, okay, go and say hi to the girl, but because they were trying to get the girl, they were directly going for it. There was a strong attachment to the outcome. There was a lot of neediness. And of course, that's extremely unattractive. So instead of try to get the girl, the focus then became on, hey, why not focus on making yourself attractive? Why not focus on working on yourself so that you become attractive, and as a byproduct, you get the girl, you attract the girl. Don't pursue, attract. The same with being present to the moment. If you directly chase being present to the moment, it's still an escape. There's still an outcome. That outcome is be present to the moment. Instead, let go and then attract presence into your life. Okay, that's my take on this. And he also talks about breathing here, where being aware of your breathing takes attention away from thinking and creates space. Okay, and this is huge. Many people's breath is unnaturally shallow, and this is a little interesting, audit you can do on yourself. Whenever you're not aware, like, of breathing, or whenever, at any point in the day, like, set your alarm on your phone and then bring some awareness to how you breathe. It most likely is. It's kind of like panty. It's shallow. You're like, what the fuck? I'm not really breathing into my body. And almost no one does. Okay, and the more aware you are of the breath, the more its natural depth will reestablish itself. And this is something you might realize too with the releases. At first, you might not even be able to inhale for 6, hold for 3, exhale for 6. You might just get up to 3 or 4. And then with time, your breath deepens, let's just say. And what he says here is that the fact that breath has no form is one of the reasons why breath awareness is an extremely effective way of bringing space into your life, of generating consciousness. Okay, so whenever something happens and you sense yourself like really identified with it, just by breathing, okay, awareness is one, and then breathing will kind of create some space. He also talks about inner body awareness, where most people are so distracted by their thoughts, so identified with the voices in their heads that they can no longer feel the aliveness within them. And that's why I say where most of us just occupy this part of our body and we don't feel this. You then begin to look not only for substitutes for that natural state of well-being within, which is why a lot of people drink, do drugs, try to chase different highs, because it temporarily gets them out of their head and they can feel again. I remember I used to really only feel when I, back in the day, like got drunk. It would just quiet my mind. I'm like, oh, I can be in my body a bit. Oh my God. But I couldn't do it sober. So you'll chase these highs, and you'll also try to cover up the continuous unease that you feel, when you're not in touch with it. So you seek the high and then you cover it up too. And a good, habit to add to your daily routine is, as much as possible, every single day, try to bring some awareness to the inner body. Try to sink into it. And one last point I want to touch on here too is stop judging yourself so much. And this is something that I've also noticed a lot in the Facebook group, where everything that happens, it's like you do a release, for example, and you go through it, and immediately after you ask for someone's opinion, like, this happened, is that normal? Is that right? Am I doing it right? Did you also experience this? Like, I don't know if I'm doing it right. You keep judging your experience. Stop. Okay? Whatever you experienced during that release is what you needed to experience. You cannot do it wrong. And by you judging yourself, it's keeping you trapped. Okay? Making yourself into a problem, the ego loves that. Continuously judging. Continuously like, I don't know if it worked. Doubt. Hesitation. Okay? And it's the same with the pain body, by the way. Whenever you have a pain body attack, don't fall into the error of thinking that there's something wrong with you. Life will give you whatever experience is most helpful for the evolution of your consciousness. How do you know this is the experience you need? Because this is the experience you are having at this moment. Could you talk a little bit more about having fronts and getting rid of them? Yeah. The first step always is identifying the front. Okay, identifying the role, identified what you're attached to. And the two ways, as I mentioned, like the general role, and this is such a great way to notice it, is what movie character are you? Who do you see yourself as? Who do you identify with? And I kid you not, for me, it was always the self-destructive artist. When I watched a movie, I was identified more with, the bad guy. Not because he was bad, but because he didn't do what, most people always identify with a hero. That was my perspective. So by me identifying with the bad guy, I was different. And I felt enhanced. I felt unique. Okay, but then, of course, there's the fact that the bad guy never succeeds, which causes a lot of self-sabotage. If you're the self-destructive kind of chaotic artist, you can't be healthy. You can't be very disciplined at times, so on and so forth. So what is your front? And when you watch a movie, you don't just relate with one character. You usually relate with everyone, but not everyone equally. So what's your character? Who are you? And then list out what are the pros and cons of that character. And then dive into it. What's so bad what's so good about being this character? What's so bad about not being this character? Let go of your attachment to the character and the resistance to not being that character. Your attachment to the front and your resistance to not being that front. Okay, dissolving the split. Whenever you feel triggered or you feel your ego attacked, you feel the need to defend yourself, that's also a sign that there's a certain front you're trying to protect. And this is something I do during Transformation Mastery Live, actually, where we do 360-degree feedback circles, where you go one by one and you share some of the things you realized, who you are, what you're working on, and then the three people, as groups of four, listen to you for those 2 minutes, let's just say, and then 1 minute each, they give you feedback. And because it's people you don't know, for the first time, it's maybe not the first time, but it's so hard to find real, authentic feedback where there's no agenda on their end because they don't know you. They don't have to be nice. They don't have to sugarcoat things. They're not thinking about preserving a friendship with you. You're a fucking stranger, so you get a lot of honest feedback. And whatever feedback you get, where it kind of stings or you feel the need to justify or defend yourself, it's pointing to your ego. It's pointing to a certain front you're trying to protect. So when that kicks in, now you can become more aware of what it is. Julian, what is your relationship to Julian the self-destructive artist now? I'm sure that is still a part of you that you've accepted, but is it still the dominant character? Or is there another dominant character? Great fucking question. So, is it still a part of me? Fuck yeah. And that's the thing with the front with the ego, is that it is a part of you, but you're not just that. Okay? So, it doesn't come down to letting go of a certain character and then, getting rid of it, let's just say, because then you're just disowning more of who you are. But it also doesn't come down to finding another character, because then you're just changing the content of the ego. The key is, why not just not be defined by a character? And people ask me, like, well, what do you do, consider yourself now? Who are you now? What character are you now? I don't try not to have one. I try not to have one. That's my answer. Try not to have one. I want to talk about how the ego reacts to being dissolved. Do you find that the ego comes back even stronger when we make efforts to dissolve it? Now be careful here, because you're still trying to get rid of the ego. Even though you're using the word dissolve, you're like, it must get rid of it. It's trying to come back. It's trying to come back even stronger. No. Don't get rid of the ego. The ego is part of you. Love the ego. But love also what is not the ego. Does this make sense? Remember the split. Say this is you, this circle sphere. Now here's how we get really deep. This is you, the circle sphere. You split yourself in two. This is the acceptable me. This is the unacceptable me. The acceptable you is the front you put on. And as a generalization, you could say it's your ego. So you're telling yourself, I must only be the acceptable me and not the unacceptable me. The key to dissolve it is still be the acceptable you, but also be the unacceptable you. Be you entirely. That's what it means to dissolve it. And if you want to get it even deeper, it's not just, I'm not just going to be this, I'm going to be the whole sphere. It's, there is no sphere. I let go to being attached to just being this and not being this. I just let go completely and I just am. So technically all of that is your ego. So ego awareness is the key to not perceiving other people as superior or inferior. Yeah, definitely. And always ask yourself too, when you perceive someone as superior or inferior, you're always getting something out of it. Always. When, we always think like, oh, when I view someone as inferior, of course I'm getting something out of it. I'm now the superior one. But even if you view someone as superior, you're getting something out of it. Why? Because there's the identification and separation. There's the right and wrong. There's the opposition. And they might be superior, but then you might also even label them as, well, they're superior, they're the enemy, they're entitled, and look at me, poor victim, I'm the good guy, but I just keep getting fucked over. You're always getting a certain payoff. How are you benefiting from viewing them as superior? How are you benefiting from viewing them as inferior? How is that enhancing your ego? And if you want to be aware too of what you're attached to, if you experience either enhancement or loss when it comes to your sense of self, okay, ego enhancement or ego, say, loss, that's something you're identified with. If you buy something and it's yours, you feel enhanced. If you lose that thing that is yours, you feel diminished. So anything that has that power over you, there's identification there. And it could be a thing, an object, a situation, or a person. So even right now, if you're with a friend or a partner and you feel that high and you feel diminished without them, there's identification. Now that does not mean don't be with them, because then you're just in reaction to that and you're just changing the label. But it means let go of that attachment and resistance to the opposite, the need and the resistance, so you can actually be with them fully. Because if there's that need, you're not really with them. You're still viewing them through the lens of they enhance my ego. You recommend not defining yourself, just be, but how do I handle that in a business, as a business person, where you need to make it crystal clear who you are, not the thing, it's the place it's coming from. Of course, you need an identity. But there's a difference between getting sucked into that identity or that story or using it as a tool to function in the real world. Okay? There's a difference between playing a character, like there's a character, viewing it as a character and viewing it as this is me now. It's like you're playing the video game. Are you playing the video game Or did you get sucked in and you're now the character in the video game? Did you buy into you being the character? This is the world we live in, and in this world, this physical world, you still have to define yourself. In the world of forms, let's just say, there is identification and separation. You have to define yourself. My name is Julian. This is me. But it's not the thing, it's the place it's coming from. I can define myself for the sake of functioning in this world, for the sake of utility, let's just say, and not get lost in that definition. It's like 1 foot, similar to what I talked about in Transformation Mastery, is it's playing the video game from the player's perspective, not the character's perspective. You are the player, but you still have to have a character. And the character is like, you could view it as an extension of you, but it's not all that is you. Same thing here. 1 foot in the game, 1 foot out of the game. Now, here's another nuanced point. Different roles and characters, you can still be those characters or roles. Like, there's always a certain context. I talk about this when it comes to social intelligence. If you interact, for example, with your boss, there's a certain context there. You can't go up to your boss and be like, hey, how's it going? Yeah, no. There's, something that's appropriate. There's a context, and you act in a way that's appropriate to the context. But there's a difference between letting that role or context, like attaching your self-worth to it, getting lost in it, becoming that role, or using that role in a more practical way just as a tool. Your self-worth is not attached to the role or the context. That's the difference. But there is always a context, and if you want to navigate this world, this physical world, let's just say, you better be aware of it, and you better, navigate it in an appropriate way. The key is not having your self-worth attached to it. And it's the same with social conditioning. People get confused because they hear me say, okay, you must drop social conditioning, but you must also be aware of social conditioning and act appropriate to the context. And that's like, but isn't that social conditioning? Aren't you reconditioning yourself? Aren't you buying into social conditioning? No. You can either be defined by social conditioning or act proactively in a way that's beneficial to you in the realms of social conditioning. So you're either controlled by it or you're in control acting within it. Say you're in a situation where it's rude to be loud. You could either, if you're being if you're identified with it and social conditioning controls you, you're just not loud and you feel like you feel like stifled. You feel like you're dropping your self-worth. It's the same as a kid where you suppress the aspect of you that is loud. Another person could feel completely comfortable being loud, but instead of feeling forced to not be loud and not having a choice in the matter, that person chooses to proactively not be loud as a way to act within the context. Okay, so it's like, do you have a choice in the matter or not? Is it out of fear or choice? Here's a great exercise. For the next week, for the next month, every time you overreact, make a note of it. Notice your triggers. Notice when you have pain body attacks. And don't judge yourself for it either. Okay, a pain body attack, as I mentioned in the Fear Q&A webinar, is it could be a breakup. If your reaction to a breakup is overreacting or disproportionate to reality, where, yeah, you should feel, sad you lost someone, but if it's like something that just is ruining you. Like, I know people who are still hurt and being run by a breakup years fucking later. Years later. That reaction is not proportionate to reality. Reality. So make a list. Even the small things. Cut off in traffic. Okay, is that reaction proportionate to reality? Interesting. It can be subtle. It can be brief. It could be intense. It could be for a long period of time. When do you get triggered? In what way? What triggers you? And then, of course, don't be obsessed about what specifically, like the driver in a red car. No, but just make a list of the general themes or general patterns you see that trigger you. That's a great exercise. Highly recommend everyone does this. How do you stop comparing yourself to other people, especially in terms of success? It's not so much the comparing, it's let go of being identified with your amount of success. As long as you're identified, like I am how much success I have, there's always going to be comparison. And you can try like, I'm going to force myself to stop comparing. No, just let go of that identification. And then you'll stop comparing as a byproduct of that. This is something I forgot where I heard it, but fucking genius. And it goes hand in hand with what I talk about in the program, where I'm like, there can't be any conditions or requirements. If someone asks you, do you want to be happy? Or do you want to be in this state of abundance, of being, of oneness? Your answer most likely is, fuck yes. Of course I do. But the true answer is no. You do if ... We all want to be happy in this state of abundance, but there's conditions that we always put on it. Yeah, I want to be very happy all the time. What if you lose your job today? Well, then I wouldn't be happy. I'm like, okay, well then there's a condition. I want to be happy all the time as long as I don't lose my job. As long as things go my way. As long as I'm positive all the time. As long as I'm in a relationship. As long as XYZ. We have all these conditions instead of no, I commit to being happy in the state of abundance all the time. Boom. No conditions, no requirements.